Hello everyone. Today we're going to go over the notes for To My Old Master, which is a letter by Jordan Anderson that we're going to read beginning next week. Just a quick note, for those of you that are familiar with the English spellings, Jordan is spelt with a U here. Your textbook is spelling his name with a U, and I've seen it online without, so for the sake of just pointing it out there to get it out there. Yes, I know Jordan is normally not spelt with a U. However, we're going to go with the book spelling because in theory, they're smart people and it's probably the accurate one. Now, analyzing letters. This is a letter and it's not something, letters are not something that we read a whole lot of, but you'll see them on things like the SAT, for example. Letters are can be formal or informal communications that convey information to an individual or group. You guys know what a letter is. If Mr. Jeremy writes a letter to your parents, he's addressing some issue or making some announcement, and he's directing that to them. Now, letters have several structural characteristics, including a date, an addressee, a salutation or greeting, a body, a closing, it can be a word or a phrase, and a signature. These things are always found on a letter. So when we go to write letters, you'll need these things within your letter. Now, what are we talking about? Well, first of all, the date. You typically find the date here at the top, if you can see it's marked. The addressee simply means who are you writing the letter to. So if you can see here, it says contact information and the whole person's address. That's because this is a business letter, but you can also find the addressee right after the salutation or greeting. It says, "Dear Mr. Julius" here. Dear is the greeting. It can also say to whom it may concern. It can also say to the order of, and then the person's name, that's fine. And then the person's name would be the addressee because that's who we are addressing this letter to, which is where the word addressee comes from. Now, next we have the body of the letter. The body of the letter can be various in size. You can see this one's 3 paragraphs. The paragraphs are fairly short. You could have several pages worth of paragraphs. That's fine. Typically, a letter is about a page, maybe 2. Depending on if it is a business letter or a personal letter. Now, your closing is this line right here where it says thanks and best wishes. You can also have sincerely is a really common one. All my love would be another one. However you're signing off to say. If we were a YouTuber, we would be signing off. It'd be the phrase. And then the last thing is the signature, which is literally the person's signature. This one's John Doe. John Doe, it's very generic, but you get the idea. It would be your personal signature. And most of the time, if it's an official letter, okay, like a business letter, for example, you would have the signature and then typed underneath, right underneath where it's signed, the person's name typed out, because some of us do not have signatures that are legible. Now, letters are typically private, which means they're not meant to be shared with anybody other than the addressee. But they can become public, which typically happens after a person's death. For example, if you look at the picture that's on the left, this is a letter that was written by Abraham Lincoln to Mrs. somebody or other. Actually, I don't know the person's name. And this was a letter to this woman. It was not meant for everybody to read. But since his death, it's been published because for whatever reason, maybe it says something about the time period. Maybe it says something about how this well-known figure, aka Abraham Lincoln, thought, and for other various reasons. So your book says, for example, the letters of well-known figures may be published typically after their deaths due to interest in the life and ideas of the sender. So because Abraham Lincoln was such a renowned figure, we want to know what he thought about everything. So we publish his letters. There are actually many former presidents. You can find their letters, their personal letters that have been published. It's very common with like pop stars, more like rock and roll. If you're thinking like the 60s, 70s, the Beatles, any of these bands, Beatles, Rush, the Eagles, any of these bands pretty well known at a time, we would publish their personal messages. Now, this art is slowly disappearing because you people don't write letters. So letters are very dear to us because they tell us something that we wouldn't know otherwise from a personal perspective. For example, my grandfather, who fought, he was in the military right after World War II, in the Marines, he wrote love letters to my grandmother. And now these letters tell us, A, not only what was going on at that time, but B, how he felt about my grandmother. And so those are special because they tell us some things that maybe the person wouldn't openly say to an audience. But now we can go back and read and we learn something about the culture of that period or, again, some personal thoughts, etc. Now, some letters are published as historical artifacts that provide context to a period of culture. Jordan Anderson's letter, the picture on the right is Jordan Anderson, conveys a memorable point of view on the systems of slavery to my old master. Now, he's writing this letter addressing his old master, the person that owned him, okay? And we're going to read this next week, and we're going to look at some different characteristics of letters within this. But what's important to know is while this is a letter, it does give us a lot of details that today we would be so distanced from we wouldn't know. Now, one point I do want to make that I didn't make in the previous slide is the addressee of a letter can be somebody that's not a single person or not necessarily private, I guess is what I'm trying to say. For example, I can write a letter to a single person. So say I'm writing a letter to Mr. Ali, right? I'm writing a letter to him. This letter is only meant for him because I'm sending it to him. Now, I could write a letter to Donald Trump, for example, but post it on social media. Now, this changes things a little bit because although I've written a letter to a person, Donald Trump, for example, I could want it to be read by many people. So not all letters are private, and this is really important. So if I'm going to, in today's world, for example, address an issue that Donald Trump has created or had a say in or whatever, I might publish it as an open letter to Donald Trump, which means I want other people to see what I have to say about whatever it is that he did. And now, more and more in this day and age, we see these open letters published on Twitter, published on Facebook, we'll see them in newspapers, etc. So it is important to know not all letters are private. It could be an open letter that somebody deliberately published for other people to read. So genre elements of a letter, they are written by an individual to another person or to a group. So when I was talking about a group, it could be like a society or, if I'm writing to the Girl Scouts, for example, that's a group of, girls. It may be formal or informal, so it could be very professional, which would be a business letter, so sir or madam, we wouldn't use any slang or whatever. Or if it's informal, like if you're writing to your friend, you might write things like LOL, OMG, you could use the slang, you could use shorthand, it'd be totally fine because it's like texting your friend, right? But in a longer form. Now, a literary letter may be read by a wider audience because the author is well known or reveals information about a period or place. So, for example, we are reading letters that were written probably 150 years ago, sometimes more, depending on what letter you're reading, because we want to know more about this period. And an open letter, which is the thing I just discussed, is addressed to a specific person but published for a broad readership, which means we want a lot of people to read this. We want them to hear our voice. Now, again, we're straying away in this day and age from letters. So an open letter has turned into maybe a rant on social media. Both pretty much do the same thing. Now, analyzing tone, you should know what tone is, but if you don't, here's the definition. It's a writer's attitude towards his or her subject. Now, a writer can communicate tone through diction, details, direct statements of his or her position. Tone is something that helps convey emotion. It's for example, the tone of somebody's voice is how they are saying something. And we talked in a previous lesson about you're looking at sentence structure here. We're looking at how they've chosen to describe certain things. That tells us a lot about how the person writing actually feels about a topic. Now, writers may also use literary devices to convey their attitude on a subject. Two of the ones mentioned in your book for this section are verbal irony and understatement. Now, verbal irony is a contrast between what is stated and what is meant. So if you look at the cartoon on the right, yeah, I love my job making clothes flat. Oh, please give me more of that action. So it's like, oh yeah, I really like my job. Yeah, definitely, I want more work. Well, obviously that's sarcasm. We know that's not true. So we're saying something, but we mean something different. Now, an understatement is saying less than is actually true in order to create emphasis. And we talked about this in a previous lesson as well, but you're undershooting something. You're saying, I don't know. You're saying something like, oh yeah, it was good. But when in reality, it was the best experience of your life. Now, today's assignment. So the critical vocabulary, there are 4 words that you need to know for this section: disposed, reckoning, recompense, and virtuous. What I want you to do for your assignment today is define each term using the definitions found in the margins of your book. So starting on page 343, and it's roughly 3 pages. So I think 343 to 346, the definitions appear for these words in the margins. And then use each word in your own sentence. Remember to underline the word within your sentence. Do this in a Google Doc and you'll submit it to the Google Classroom. But do make sure that you have the definition and the word in your own sentence for each of these terms. And have a great day, guys.